Talking Joe, where the truth may be told.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. Now, today, after all of those silent issues that we had back in April, why not let's continue in a silent space, but talk about it. So today we are going to be covering G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue 21B, aka Silence Between Borders. This was released back in 2008 as a comic pack exclusive and has subsequently been reprinted in a couple of places. But I will not be talking about this issue by myself. As always, I will be joined by my co-host. It's A Real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners and viewers. What an interesting object and story we're going to talk about in this episode. Mark and I, 2 weeks nowadays out of each month, we know we're definitely talking about a new issue of A Real American Hero, and we know we're definitely talking about a new issue of Enter John Universe G.I. Joe. And then there are these other weeks where we're still catching up on final bits from our Devil's Due inspection, or we've got an interview, or maybe one of us is traveling and we just have to skip a week. And at last, we're going to start getting to these toy pack-in comics. We'll insert these here and there as the schedule suggests. Mm-hmm. This is not the beginning of an uninterrupted run. And worth noting that these were published by Hasbro. These were not published by Marvel or Devil's Due. This is 2007. I don't know quite where in the year this lands. So, we're transitioning into that year from Devil's Due to IDW.
Yeah. I was gonna say the historical context for this is the G.I. Joe America's Elite issue 36 came out in June 2008, and then it's just a few months later, IDW started with their G.I. Joe issue 0 in October 2008. So we're sort of landing here in that kind of transition period as Devil's Due was winding down. IDW was about to gear up. Yeah, it's published by Hasbro, and there's an editor credit that you can find in places, which is Aaron Hubrich of Conceptopolis. And so he was this sort of editor figure that was helping Hasbro to put the comics together. And he had a background of working with Devil's Due in their licensing kind of shoot-off kind of arm, which was called Kanoichi, which we've talked a little bit about in our Devil's Due episodes. But
so I said 2007 a minute ago, and you reminded us that 2008 is that transition year from Devil's Due to IDW. So can you remind us, Mark, this comic, Silence Between Borders, has the 25th anniversary logo on it, so 82 to 2007. Do you remember when this issue with 2-pack came out?
I'm not sure with complete precision, but I think that 25th anniversary brand kind of was a bit of a longer era than probably just one year. So as far as I can gather, this was a 2008 comic. So it came in this comic pack. So we're in it was released with a Snake Eyes figure and a Storm Shadow figure. And it was sort of like the beginning of an era where Hasbro was beginning to produce and include these exclusive comics to sort of.
Can I say a little more? So this Snake Eyes is a battle damaged figure to match the scene in the original issue 21 and in this issue 21B, and then Storm Shadow here is in his original costume, but he has this added piece. He has a cloak which is not in the original Silent Interlude, but does get briefly introduced here. And then he also comes with a different accessory, a bow and arrow. And for a couple of years, or for a year previously, Hasbro had produced 3 packs of figures, including select reprints of Marvel issues, like roughly the first 10, and then also some issues later on. And those 3 packs of figures would be characters spotlighted in that issue, right? The most famous one is it issue 26 that comes with Flashback, Storm Shadow, and Flashback's Stalker and Classified, which is the Flashback Snake Eyes. But this was also a way to get these very sort of retro figures that had the sort of comics accurate collars and cuffs and new head sculpts that looked a little bit more like Herb Trimpe drawings. So after this year and a half or 2 of these 3 packs with figures, Hasbro switched over to 2 packs that also reprinted select Marvel issues, right? So according to yojo.com, this is 2008, 2009.
Yep.
And there were 7 of these. These had new cover art.
Mostly Ashley Wood and Greg Horn.
Yes. And it was fun because on the back of the packaging, it would show the new cover next to the original cover. And the original cover artists weren't credited, but, well, halfway. And then we think this is 2008, but maybe it's 2009. Hasbro made another switch. The packaging was very similar, but now instead of reprints with new covers, it was entirely new issues. And the big hook here, and the advertising included this important detail, was that these new stories were written by Larry Hama, and they were drawn by ? Because the advertising did not mention who drew them, and the comics do not have credits. Although, do some of the introductions on the inside front cover say, like, Larry Hama returns? So it's sort of an indirect credits. And Hasbro made a total of 16 of these. And it's confusing because the first 3 are these half issues, 21B, 32.5, 36.5. And then they switched over to sort of a numbering. So the 4th one is number 4, and there's a number 4 on the cover, right? 5, 6, 7, 8. And then the numbering sort of restarts to tie in with G.I. Joe Resolute, this cartoon, but the comics don't really line up with the cartoon. It's just a way to sort of rebrand the logo.
Brand them, yeah. And line up maybe some of the design potentially.
Yeah.
Yes. But even the design, not completely.
And it's worth remembering that in 2007, 8, 9, when these new G.I. Joe comics written by Larry Hama are being released, Larry Hama is either not writing G.I. Joe or writing very little, because at the end of the Devil's Due run, he's writing the monthly Storm Shadow series, which only makes it to, is it issue 7, 8?
I think so. Yep.
And, he'd written 1 or 2 other short things for Devil's Due, but this is still before the IDW launch, where he writes the opening arc and the 3rd arc of G.I. Joe Origins. And this is certainly before A Real American Hero returns with issue 156 in 2010. And so if this seems like, Larry Hama's writing so much G.I. Joe, he wrote a year's worth of comics. Yes, at a time when he was not writing G.I. Joe otherwise, or barely writing G.I. Joe otherwise.
And yeah, certainly these first 3 numbered issues, the 0.5s, are stories that are meant to sort of connect to the original continuity, even if there are certain continuity quirks, and the others are a little bit more timeless, that perhaps you can try and slot them into a place in the continuity, but they're essentially one and done stories that up to the reader as to quite how you want to reconcile where they would fit in any sort of continuity, if they fit in any sort of continuity at all. So, for example, you've got Falcon and
Nemesis Enforcer, right? Larry Hama sort of, famously, infamously in interviews or at convention panels, will say, I said no to Cobra Law. And if you think back to all the comics, Cobra Law characters have never shown up in a Larry Hama comic, asterisk, with the exception of this one Hasbro pack-in that came with a Nemesis Enforcer action figure. There's one more little bit of context. I'm going to go back further. What I like about these new Larry Hama written Hasbro, I think the shorthand is Hasbro comics, right? Or because if you call them the 25th anniversary, only the first few still have that logo, and then 2 of them have the movie logo, and then they go back to the generic logo and then the Resolute logo, and again the numbering is confusing because the first 3 are not 1, 2, 3, and the last 2 aren't. Anyway, but there's a kind of a grand tradition of G.I. Joe pack-in comics. G.I. Joe stories that are pretty good and or written by Larry Hama that show up in unusual places. We can go back to the Larry Hama written story in the first issue of G.I. Joe magazine, which has that amazing Hector Garrido cover of a couple Joes right on a cliff with their fists pumping. There's the 3-part Starduster comic that came with G.I. Joe Action Stars serial. And then there are the 4 mini comics that were packed in with some G.I. Joe action figures in, is it 1993? With like Beachhead and Roadblock, and it's like turquoise. And those were definitely made by Marvel. And so I've kind of always wanted a collection of all these weird side stories. Oh, that's right. And then the Spy Troops comics that were half the cross cells, those catalogs that came with G.I. Joe vehicles that showed photos of all of the toys that were available that year that had very, very short comics that were written by Larry Hama, again, credited, but the artists not credited. So the 2 problems with doing a collection of all these side stories is that some of them aren't good. And I think in all the cases, certainly most of the cases, there aren't good art files available, like photocopies of the artwork that you could remaster, or the original film, or early scans, digital files.
And even beyond that, they're awkward sizes as well. In often case that they were, given as a sort of a, pack-in, fold-out leaflet kind of format. So, all
right. And then there's a little bit more context here because this issue 21B, and again, it's not 21 and a half. It doesn't take place between 21 and 22. It takes place during 20, and the inside front cover even says so, right? All the action you didn't see the first time.
Yeah, I was going to add the fact that I guess one of the reasons that we get these different outfits with the comic, the Snake Eyes with the battle damage and the Storm Shadow in this hood, and rather than the more classic presentations, is that very recently they had put out the issue 21 reprint with the Ashley Wood cover, which featured Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow in the more traditional outfits. So by doing this comic, they obviously had to present something that looked different, and the Storm Shadow look, I think, was mostly inspired by that flashback scene from, I guess, issue 26 or whenever, for the Hardmaster assassination, when there's a Storm Shadow looking figure in a hood and a big bow who is sort of fleeing the ninja compound. So I think that's the inspiration that they took, and because they had this different looking character, I guess they were Hama and the artist were asked to kind of reference the look of that design in some way, hence the appearance of that cloak on the inside.
Yes. So, and the same way that issue 21 has been reprinted many different ways, many different times, in single issues, in pack-ins, in regular reprints, in fancy reprints, along with other issues. This story 21B has been reprinted twice. The first one is in IDW's G.I. Joe The Complete Collection hardcover. which if you're just listening and not watching, both Mark and I are holding up our copies, proving what authentic G.I. Joe fans wear. And this comes chronologically right after issue 21 in the book. But bummer, IDW did not have access to the original files, either because Kunoichi or Hasbro didn't hold on to them, or that's probably it. I probably didn't need to say either. And so IDW had to sadly take a copy of the original Silence Between Borders and scan every page on a scanner. And so if you look closely at this reprint in the hardcover, none of the black ink is pure black. It's very, very, very dark gray. And you can see sort of a dot texture pattern over almost every page, which is either something that they added to sort of cover up the sort of second generation scan, or an artifact of scanning something and resizing it slightly, which happens, where you get sort of a moire pattern.
You pointed out the page where you can see that scanning process is evident, the greatest, which was on the one of the last pages.
It's the third to last page. Destro is walking right at us. In the original comic book, it is on the right side. This is a tall vertical panel, right? So here it is in the original. Destro is walking toward us. He's on the bottom half of the page.
Significantly, he was on the in the original, he was on the right-hand page. In the reprint, he is on the left-hand page.
And there's a it looks sort of like a burn mark or like a dark reflection all the way on the left side of that panel, up and down vertically. And that's some kind of either fix or artifact of needing to flatten a comic book onto a scanner and it getting a little stretched, or there being a weird reflection, or something like that. And then the story was reprinted one more time in that during that year when IDW was doing a lot of 3 or 4 issues at a time, reprinting in its final stretch of G.I. Joe, which was totally reasonable. I sound like I'm making fun, but I did like that. So there was this special called Complete Silence, which, as we've said before, is not complete. But it does have the original silent interlude, and then issue 21B, which IDW at this point is calling 21.5, which is fine, a little confusing, a little inaccurate. Artist Jeremy Dale does get credit here, which is nice, although it's unclear if he is also the color artist or not.
The online credits give additional credits to colorist Kieran Oats and letterer Jim Keplinger.
But there weren't letters, right? In the original edition? There's no word balloons or captions.
There is some type on some monitors that Destro is looking at.
On the final page, does it say mission complete, or is that in the reprint? Okay, so
yes.
Okay,
does
so
say
in
that
the
as well,
reprint, in Complete Silence, IDW added a title at the front of the first panel of the first story, right? Silence Between Borders, so that you go from the last page of the 1984 famous, excellent original to this new story, and then on the final page, they've added 2 words on the bottom: mission complete, with a period. And this is that same sort of new file where IDW had to scan an original comic book, a printed comic book, and you have these dots, and you have this very, very slight fuzzing of everything. It's not as tight, and the blacks are not as black. Okay, so all of that context and introduction out of the way, Mark. Do we talk about the comic?
Yeah, we can get into this in the comic, or we can talk about it now. I was just going to say that a lot of these issues were drawn by an artist, Jeremy Dale, who sadly died at a very young age. He was born 1979, so just a little younger than myself, and died in 2014. And I think was fair to say quite beloved by the Joe community, that he appeared at a lot of conventions and shows and so on. And I think people just generally speak very fondly of him. He was best known for his work on G.I. Joe in these comics, and Pop Gun Volume 1 from Image Comics, for which he won the 2008 Harvey Award for Best Anthology.
Let me correct that. He's in Pop Gun, and that whole volume
I
won
see.
the anthology. I don't believe it was specific to his story.
Thank you for the correction. But he did a good number of these issues, certainly most of the first few.
He also drew a comic series for Action Lab called Skyward, which ran 12 issues. Yeah, this was in 2013. And ran 9 issues. I'm counting variant covers. He wrote it and drew it, which I think means it's creator owned. And funny enough, I was flipping through a long box in the basement of my shop 2 months ago, and I found an issue of this. Just one issue of Skyward all by itself. And I thought, wait, I know this art. I know this hair and these eyes. Is this the guy? Is this the guy who did those G.I. Joe comics that people say is the guy's really nice, right? Didn't this guy die young? Yes, I do have an issue of Skyward. And if you want to learn more about Jeremy Dale, his website is no longer up, but his DeviantArt page still is, and it's the Jeremy Dale. Dale is D-A-L-E, and he has this page. This DeviantArt page does have a small gallery of his G.I. Joe Hasbro pack-in work. So you can see the original pencils for a couple covers and pages. And this does confirm what my eyeballs were telling me, which is that these comics were reproduced straight from the pencils. They were not inked.
Right, makes sense.
Which makes sense because Hasbro would have, wanted to keep the budget very low. And at that point, Devil's Due wasn't even inking a lot of its G.I. Joe comics. It was just, the artist or the color artist gets the scan of the pencils and then darkens them.
Okay, makes sense. Should we talk about his style at all as an artist, or do you want to get into that as we go?
No, yeah, we can talk about this. Dale's work is, what are some words we'd use to describe it?
I think of artists a little bit like Eric Larson. So we're seeing quite a lot of musculature. His characters are drawn, big, bulky, superheroic. And one of my observations that we might touch on later on is that, Cobra Commander is sort of drawn a little bit looking like a bodybuilder on a page later on. And that cartoony dial is turned up a little bit higher than perhaps we're used to in G.I. Joe, and slightly more exaggeration in some of the expressions and so on. So I think one of the things that probably works less for these issues, and particularly when they're reprinted alongside the original, is that they're less sympathetic in terms of the style. That when Rod Wiggum transitioned into Ron Wagner in the pages of ARAH, their styles were quite similar, and they sort of meshed together nicely, and they're not at all jarring. Whereas if you have like issue 21, issue 22, sort of sitting alongside this 21B, they don't, they definitely don't look the same.
Yeah, I think your Eric Larson tag is pretty good. I think that Dale's figure work and panel compositions aren't as refined as Larson's. And also in Larson, I see a lot of Jack Kirby, and I don't see the Jack Kirby here. But yes, in terms of eyes and hair and musculature and fabric and hands, I absolutely see Eric Larson. We don't know if Jeremy Dale had Eric Larson as an influence, so we could just say it reminds us of Eric Larson. But yeah, in terms of cartooniness, the eyes are a little bit bigger, like 5-10% bigger than, anatomical. And another thing that's happening here is that Dale's compositions, he's still a beginning artist on these G.I. Joe comics. And some of the compositions for panels and page flow are okay or good, but not great, and could use more refining and stronger design choices. Like there's this panel of Storm Shadow sort of leaping upward in the little jail cell in the dungeon toward the ladder, and it's sort of, not clear where he's standing, and sort of like there's not enough oomph on the leg. It's like pushing him as he jumps. And then in terms of the sympathy that you just referred to, a big difference is modern computer coloring. These new Hama Dale comics were published in 2008, 2009, and the colors are very computery. Everything is rendered, and shiny things are really shiny, and every exterior sky in 21B is an aggressive yellow orange red, yellow orange brown gradient, like sunset that is punching you in the face. And if you like that style, it's quite nice. I think it's too much, and it does not match for this story. And what's really strange is that the other two issues that come right after this in the Hasbro pack-ins are definitively between Marvel issues.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is during issue 21. So it's a very daring and bold or risky storytelling experiment, because not only might it require you to be familiar with issue 21 or have issue 21 in your other hand, but it also invites even stronger of a comparison to an issue, like, was it 36 and a half or 34 and a half? You could sort of take or leave that, but this is like kind of 21 again. This is like 21 Redux, 21 Uber. And then on top of that, 21 is like the best issue, everyone's favorite issue. It's sort of like, it's like if you and your friends were like, we're going to make a Godfather fan film. It's like, oh, you're going to make like Godfather Part 4 or Godfather in Space? It's like, no, we're going to do a bunch of scenes during Godfather Part 2. Oh, are you sure about that?
And the actors, they're going to be as good as the original ones, right? Right?
It's all my friends, and they're all 20.
I see. And I guess we should also make the comparison of this issue, which is an indirect recreation of the original 2021, that it's sort of happening in parallel or from slightly different angles. That IDW also did their kind of comics experiment where they recreated issue 21 page by page, but each page being tackled by a different artist, and it being left up to them as to how faithfully they would recreate that page, whether it's just they're in their own style or whatever else.
And then there's one more sort of parallel and comparison, and I'm going to forget the title of this story, so please remind me, Mark. When Devil's Due took the 6-issue Snake Eyes classified miniseries and collected it in a softcover,
right? Mm-hmm.
It included a new, it's 5 or 6 pages, story written by Larry Hama and penciled by Ron Wagner, and it is it Silent Prelude?
I believe that's the name of it. Yep. We recorded a Talking Joe episode just talking about that 6-page story or whatever it was.
Yes, and I'm sure and certainly that episode was as long as all of our other episodes where we're talking about a full comic or 4 issues in a row. And that was definitely, the like couple of minutes before the first page of 21. And so one of my questions, actually, Mark, that's the thing that's not included in Complete Silence, by the way. That makes it not complete. Boo. One of my questions, Mark, is have you reread Silent Prelude recently enough to be able to say whether it and 21 and 21B can all work in continuity? Or is there anything about Silent Prelude and Silence Between Borders that don't quite jive with like where Storm Shadow is and the Claw?
Yeah, I mean, I think
what have you.
I think Silent Prelude sort of makes sense with the original 21, so makes sense with this. It's essentially a few pages of story telling a story as to how did Storm Shadow get hold of Scarlet on that claw, such that he's going to be carrying her on the claw to return back to the Cobra Castle. So I think, yeah, there isn't anything directly within that story that is particularly controversial in terms of the continuity. The only bit being the guest appearance of the White Clown within that particular issue. But otherwise it's fairly light in terms of what it overall it's trying to accomplish. It's a little action sequence with Snake Eyes, Scarlet, and Storm Shadow.
And as I recall from that episode, was our sort of summary at the end, it was that it was fun but didn't quite work, or it was fun but it didn't
feel like it was
compare
necessarily, it didn't compare so well and wasn't completely necessary, really.
to 21. And so, folks, at the end of this episode, we will pass our judgment. Does Silence Between Borders stand shoulder to shoulder with the original Silent Interlude, or does it fall short as if hanging from a cobra claw, flying towards a castle and being dropped? Okay, so a summary, a cover, plot breakdown.
Yeah, no, I was getting distracted, sort of looking at Jeremy Dale's website. That just to properly close out the point that you're making there, that the website does
mean the DeviantArt,
DeviantArt website. Yes, his gallery has got a handful of pages from this story, so you can see the original black and white pencils and compare them to the page.
I'll just say, if these were inked by a really strong inker and colored by a really strong color artist who eased off, I would have been more excited. This is a lot to take in for being. I mean, it's free. It came with two toys and it's free. Although I guess the cost is built into the price, but I do think this would have benefited from inking and a different color treatment. So is there plot breakdown?
We know it.
Folks, as many times as Silent Interlude has been printed and reprinted, Mark and I have found ways to talk about it on Talking Joe.
So
when you go to our YouTube page, like the first video you hit is us talking with Gene Park about his original art for Silent Interlude, and when we spoke with Billy Penn, right? He was sure to remind us of the sort of toy fan film. Is it in stop motion, or it's sort of picto fiction remake of Silent Interlude that he made with his son, and I think possibly his brother as well. But yes,
okay. So we have talked about this issue a lot. I'm sure any G.I. Joe fan watching this knows the issue,
and if you haven't, press stop right now and go read Silent Interlude and come back.
Your mind will be blown.
Plot breakdown.
Scarlet has been taken by Storm Shadow to the Silent Castle and Cobra Commander. Snake Eyes jumps from C-130 by parachute, landing on the top of the castle to come and rescue her. Scarlet is able to sort of rescue herself, and as Snake Eyes works his way through the castle, they eventually reunite. There is a fight with Storm Shadow. Their tattoos are exposed, revealing a matching hexagram. What could that mystery be? I guess we'll never know. So what I did, Tim, as I thought as an interesting way of sort of working our way through this issue, was doing a bit of a side-by-side comparison, because for the most part, what's happening on page 1 of Silence Between Borders is happening in parallel to what's happening in the original page order of Silent Interlude, with a little bit of reordering in the middle of the issue. So the story starts with Wild Bill and Snake Eyes kind of tracking Storm Shadow, with Storm Shadow having Scarlet tucked under his arm in a sack while he is flying towards the Cobra Castle on that claw. So it's a relatively significant difference in terms of the initial kind of posing of this scene, that it's much more from Snake Eyes and Wild Bill's point of view, with Storm Shadow being much less significant in terms of the composition.
This also changes the sense of timing or urgency or coincidence. Your mileage may vary, because in the original Silent Interlude, Snake Eyes doesn't show up on that C-130 until, is it page 3? Maybe it's page 4. And because you've had this whole introductory scene of Storm Shadow on the claw flying into the castle and presenting this captive, Cobra Commander reacts. And I suppose if you sort of quizzed me, like, oh, would the C-130, would Snake Eyes, would they have been tracking the Cobra Claw with radar or with a satellite? Yeah, that makes sense. But without that detail, my mind had to sort of abstractly fill in the blanks. Or maybe they don't have radar and it's like a hunch, or maybe it's a visual, or maybe they have some intel, like a half a page of a communique to Storm Shadow, like bring the package to the castle, and it becomes this very specific thing. If it becomes a very specific plot point, if Wild Bill and Snake Eyes in the C-130 are using satellite tech, to track the Cobra Ninja on this very, very small, specific Cobra vehicle. And that's cool. I can imagine, I like imagining Larry Hama thinking, well, how would they have followed them? Oh, radar. Okay, cool. But at the same time, it's more fun in the original if you turn the page, and now that you've been introduced to the bad guys and you can be worried about Scarlet, oh, Snake Eyes is coming to get her, right? He's coming to save her. Whereas this is now like, Snake Eyes is on a mission. Oh, what's he doing? He's following that Cobra. And this kind of thing happens several times in the story, where a new detail fills in a gap. And then I ask myself, oh, did I need that gap filled in? Or did I want that gap filled in? Or now that it's been filled in, am I sort of more satisfied?
Yeah, there's a little detail in the readout on the first page. There's sort of that glowing yellow circle in between Wild Bill and Snake Eyes, which would appear to be the silhouette of the claw, sort of being tracked. So we kind of got an idea that they are tracking the claw and possibly making use of a satellite, which is on the far left-hand side of the page. I guess the reason that satellite is there is to kind of insinuate that it's satellite tracking. But there's a point which you make, which is kind of like filling in the blanks and stuff. And to some degree, part of the issues with Silence Between Borders is that it kind of only works because issue 21 already exists and we're familiar with it. As a thing unto itself, some of the story connecting makes less sense. It's a B-roll of like, while the main story is happening, these other things are happening. If you don't know what the main story is, these other things that are happening make less sense.
Yeah, the analogy is there's that movie Anchorman: The Legend of Ron Burgundy, where there was so much footage that the director and the team and the writer shot when they made the first movie, that the studio released an entire second movie, and it is another story that takes place during the movie, and it is a movie length, but it doesn't quite work on its own. You have to have just watched the actual first movie. And this, I'm not talking about the sequel. I'm not talking about Anchorman 2. This is very much like that. And a good example is on page 10, where Storm Shadow is all of a sudden just falling down into this dungeon, prison cell, or maybe jumping up out of it. I can't quite tell. And I think, oh, how did he get there? Because if I turn back 2 pages earlier, he's in Destro's security monitoring room with the chess set, and he's communicating that he has to take his sword and go somewhere. And
then next time we see him, he's falling, and it's like
or jumping.
Yeah, I think on the left-hand side, he's falling. So there's, you're kind of reading panels, kind of 1, 2, and 3 of the original comic. Storm Shadow's opening the dungeon. He's getting a chain wrapped around his head. He's being pulled down. Then he falls down and lands. Then he jumps back up as Scarlet is lifting herself out. He grabs, he's, I don't know, lifting the hatch and is about to grab her, and then she whacks his head. But it's very much like, did we need to know that beat, that she's grabbed him and pulls him down and he falls? Oh, right. I didn't realize that he fell. So yeah.
Mark used the term B-roll a minute ago, and that really is fitting here, or outtakes, takes have been cut out. And part of much of what works so well with the original silent interlude is Larry Hama's really expert storytelling and pacing. And if you know the added context of, he wrote and drew that issue in a rush, and he wrote and drew that issue making it up as he went along, just drawing straight onto the board. He didn't jot down a bullet list of plot points. He didn't sit down at his typewriter or computer and type up a plot and then sketch them. He just wrote and drew at the same time directly onto the page. So he was drawing the script and the comic at the same time for Steve Leialoha to ink finish. And Hama's instincts as a storyteller, as a writer, as an editor, are so developed in 1984 that if you give him 3 days to just like explode a comic onto some artboards in a rush, it turns out to be excellent. And if you give him, a week or two or whatever it is, normal amount of script writing time, 23 years later, to kind of retell the story, but add new details, and then you give it to an artist who's okay, it doesn't add up to much. And I think we can also say here, we haven't asked Hama, we don't know definitively that he did not do the layouts for 21B, Silence Between Borders.
Seems unlikely, yeah.
We're pretty sure, generally in the last 15 years, when Hama has created new G.I. Joe comics and he's being paid to write and not also do breakdowns or layouts, he is just writing and not doing breakdowns or layouts. And certainly he's posted on Facebook now and then a drawing he's done or a photo of himself holding a sword. And he said, sometimes it's just easier to draw it out for the artist, a scene or a panel, or send them a photo of what the pose should be.
You saying that as well made me think that if Hama was going to tell a story off his own back, he might not suggest this as the thing that he wants to do. But if Hasbro come up with the idea and ask him to write the story and tell him their concept of it and say that they'll pay him to do it, he'll probably just, say, okay, it's not necessarily the story that I'd want to come up with independently, but, why not? I can do that.
And one more bit of context, Hama, I don't have this quote at my fingertips, but I really like it and I think of it sometimes. He said this on Facebook a couple years ago. He said, you write a story every month and you do your best, and sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it sucks. And it's a little hard for me to read that because I'm a big Hama fan and booster, and every Hama story I read, particularly if it's G.I. Joe, I'm thinking like, all right, it's a great writer writing my favorite thing. And if it turns out only okay, I have to sort of recalibrate my brain, and sort of accept the disappointment. Like, oh, this wasn't as good as it could have been, or this really good issue wasn't as great as my favorite issue. And there have been some issues that are only okay or not great. And it's, if you listen to this podcast, you might sometimes hear it's a little hard for me to come to terms with that. And at the same time, so Hama admits, even if I have a hard time doing it, that some stuff he writes is bad. And he's not worried about one story being the best or one story being the worst. He's worrying about, is someone going to hire him the next month to write a story? And each month is another chance to write a best story. Mm-hmm. And this guy has experimented. I don't think we think of Larry Hama as an experimental writer, but he has done a handful of really interesting experiments. There's the scene in Nth Man where the world turns upside down. There's G.I. Joe 21 and 85. There's Triptych and Diptych in around 92 with the Eco Warriors and DEF and the Ninja Force. There's 275, which is all splash pages and wordless. And And I'm sure there's one or two really good issues of Wolverine where he's doing something interesting with narration. And I would love to blame someone at Hasbro for coming up with this interesting idea that we all could have guessed might not work. Hey, take the most famous and beloved G.I. Joe story and add to it. Here's an okay artist and not a lot of money. Right? It's like, it's like Superman 4, right? It's like, okay, we've got the guy, but we don't want to spend any money on this because we're cheap. And can we reuse a shot from the first movie? And also the script's not great, but like, man, people sure want this fourth Superman movie, right? Because, the third one's kind of funny. It's like, let's reset. No, right? It turns out people don't really want that fourth Superman movie. And so I would love to blame this on Hasbro, that someone had an idea and someone else should have said, nah. But it's entirely possible that Hasbro said, hey, that famous issue with the ninjas, do you want to do something like that? And Hama's like, well, what if I did more of it? Or they said, hey, we want to do these figures from that issue. How do you sort of do that issue again? He's like, well, what if I told some more story around it? And so maybe it's Hama's idea. And then in his own words, it sucked. Question mark. Tim asked as a question and did not say as a declarative statement. Although, stick around to the end of the episode and I'll give you my rating of this issue.
So as we're sort of moving through the story, in the original issue, Scarlet is presented to Cobra Commander is then sort of led away. And we're sort of observing some of that through the lens of Destro in his security camera room. It looks like Scarlet is kind of being led away. There's a sort of image there that looks very much like Scarlet coming down the stairs. It looks an awful lot like the bigger panel in the original book, with Scarlet being led down the stairs. So,
Mark, are you being as specific as saying that on page 3 of Silence Between Borders, that those 6 security monitors on the bottom panel act as 6 sequential panels in the panel behind Destro? Like, are we supposed to read those left to right, top to bottom as a 6-panel continuity in 6 TV screens? Because that's the kind of thing that I think, smart comics guy Larry Hama would put into a scene, as opposed to just like, 6 random security camera shots, because Destro's got cameras everywhere. It's like, I don't think we're supposed to read these as simultaneous.
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's anything there that necessarily contradicts that it's simultaneous. That it could be looking at that a single snapshot from a variety of different angles.
You might be right, based on the stairs in that first TV, the 4th and 5th TV, and even the sort of the down angle of the 6th TV.
Yeah, I do think it's possibly a more sequential progression might have been an interesting thing. It would be less reflective of what would happen in reality on a screen.
But a playful use of the language of comics, even if not a realistic moment of reality.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And so on the next page, Storm Shadow and Scarlet make their way down into the Oubliette dungeon. He's sort of tying her up. There's that sort of exchange between Scarlet and Storm Shadow, which again is kind of now being played out on the video monitors as observed by Destro. And then I think we get a slightly different dynamic to Snake Eyes, sort of his silent insertion into the castle, which is that we get a much clearer view that Cobra onto him earlier, that there's an alarm going off that Destro observes. Intruder, incoherent radar masking, the message says, as an alarm goes off and gets his attention. And then on the next page, the Cobra trooper on the battlements is able to sort of view through his goggles that the C-130 is there, even if he doesn't notice Snake Eyes quite himself. Although it's not completely clear that he misses Snake Eyes and only sees the C-130. Although, yeah, as the page turns, actually, you do get Destro observing his monitors, where it's security status intruder, and it feels like he's more sort of running in the original book. He's more running like a simulation, like what is the probability of having an intruder? It's next to 0, and so it feels like in the original he's completely unaware that there's an intruder, whereas in this new version it seems more obvious that there probably is one.
This is when I start to think about this modern scenario creation of in-between stories. In the original Marvel run, Larry Hama has been saying like, oh, it was all a retcon. It was all a continuous, 12-year retcon. And it's now a 40-year retcon. And what he means is, on one page, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow have these tattoos. And then 5 issues later, he starts to figure out what that means. And he writes a story where they have this shared history. And he did not have that when he's writing and drawing issue 21. And then, in Snake Eyes trilogy, there's even more of their backstory. And then in issue 144, another like 6 years later, there's even more of this backstory. And he did not have it in mind when he was doing 94, 95, 96, or when he was doing, 26 and 27. But there's this other thing that this modern creation. Okay, so it used to be that if you were going to tell a flashback story in sort of any comic, it was all like a retcon. It's like 20 years later in a book like Fantastic Four, a new writer artist like slightly rewrites a scene. It's like, oh, Reed asking Sue out in the original Kirby, Stanley Jack Kirby run is kind of gross because Reed's like 39 years old and Sue's like 17 years old because he's been in World War II. It's like, okay, let's sort of like change their age difference, right? Or you like introduce some family member, like, oh, this one I'm making up, like Reed's aunt. It's like, well, she was never in the comic for the first 20 years, and now she's a character, and I guess she was always there. We just never saw her. That's one thing. But there's this other thing where you have like in the Star Wars special edition, like we're definitely going to put Boba Fett into episode 4, right? Doesn't he confront Han in that new scene where Jabba, like digital Jabba, shows up?
He might be in the background in that Jabba
Let me do a
scene.
different example. But like this happens now in Star Wars, where you originally had these 3 movies, and then later on you have these prequels that are telling like more story, and now you've got all these shows and comics and novels that are telling lots of specific stories between movies and between other shows. And some of them are really interesting and satisfying, like, I don't know, Andor, and some of them are mixed, like, Kenobi. And then some of the comics, it's like, I don't even have an example at my fingertips, but if you're a Star Wars fan, you have probably experienced this. It's like, oh, there's something, it's like, how did so-and-so get from one Star Wars planet to another Star Wars planet between those 2 movies? Like, well, now I know. I didn't need to know. There's the opposite of the G.I. Joe PSA. Now I know. I wish you hadn't told me. Right? It's like, oh, you spent like millions of dollars or printed, thousands of copies of this novel to tell this exciting story of like how the rebellion got from one planet to another. It's like, I assume they used spaceships. It's like, well, apparently they stole the spaceships and they like bumped into Greedo and Boba Fett again, because you can't have a Star Wars movie without like Boba Fett showing up. Doesn't matter what year or what planet.
You remind me that I was rewatching Rogue One, and they bump into like the wall. What's he called? Walrus guy, the guy that's in the bar. I don't like your friend. That guy.
Right.
Anyway,
and it's either fun because maybe that guy goes other places, and you bump into people from your past, or you bump into someone that you don't know your friend knows, and your friend's not there, or it's weird and distracting. All right, so around this page, if you got into the page with the ad for speaking of Star Wars, one of the things that I love about reading comics, I won't even say old comics, I'll just say
Any
comics,
comic.
not in a graphic novel reprinting, is you get ads. So there's this ad for 3 Star Wars figures. The fans have spoken, right? Speaking of awesome or perhaps unnecessary, you choose. I don't have a vote here. You know, it's like 3 bad guys who like aren't officially in canon because they're not in a movie back in 2007, 2008, but because, you know, they get to be in an action figure, it's like, well, someone described them in one chapter of one novel or something. Or it's like, well, we've got some concept art for General Grievous before we see him in episode 2. Anyway, what am I talking about, Mark?
We were talking about Snake Eyes jumping out of a C-130. This is just seems to be a much, you know, one of those instances where it's a faithful kind of representation of what's happening. He's jumped out of a C-130 and he's in the air at one point, but not completely from a different angle, you know, drawn differently, but not completely necessary. Then we're back. We're in this new kind of sequence with Storm Shadow in his sort of reddy brown hood, so that we can have a few pictures of him looking like that, because that's the toy that comes with the comic. And he's got this sequence looking at Scarlet on Destro's sort of chess set. And while this is sort of happening simultaneously, Scarlet is on the monitors, sort of finding her bobby pin to unpick her locks, but Destro is getting distracted because
I will say that that bobby pin bit on the monitor is very small and hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's another case where this particular presentation of information, whether it's a new story point, one that is in the original comic that you don't see, or one that is in the original comic that is recreated, this is not enough. And this is an example of, I don't think this comic works unless you have read the original recently and maybe have it next to you. I do think this 2-page sequence of Storm Shadow picks up the Scarlet chess piece and takes it off the board because she's now a prisoner, and then leaves because she's just escaped, and then Destro puts it back on the board. That's great. It's not necessary, but in terms of sort of bits of drama and moving the story forward and sort of showing what the characters are thinking, it's actually my favorite part of this issue.
And sort of comparing those 2 pages is sort of, you know, if it's one beat, another beat, you know, it's potentially Destro has put the Scarlet piece back on the board and then is surveying the chess board with the pieces back in place. So sort of a bit of a continuation, but yes, after being distracted, they do notice that Scarlet has disappeared. So Storm Shadow runs out to find out what is happening. So we cut back to a sort of slightly different angle of Snake Eyes landing on the battlements of the Silent Castle, knocking this trooper down to the ground, but in a slightly less satisfying version than the original. And then we get to this weird sequence that doesn't really make any sense unless you exactly know the original story of Scarlet grabbing Storm Shadow with the chain, wrapping around his head, pulling him down into the dungeon and making her get away. We get the scene of Scarlet sort of running through the corridors and trying to evade Cobra Troopers and Storm Shadow, while elsewhere in the castle, Snake Eyes in the original book is having a fight on the battlements that we get to see less of.
Larry Hama's new story here does try to take note of that chain. That the chain that Scarlet used to help get out, you know, now Storm Shadow has, but now he drops. Like, that's a beat. Jeremy Dale hasn't quite drawn it that Scarlet is looking at the chain. It's more general that Scarlet is looking in the direction of Storm Shadow as he's running, and he doesn't see her.
Yep.
And the chain falls, and there's no sound effects, but the little like flash, the sort of like lightning bolt flash on the bottom of the panel, that's to say, that's not his foot springing off the ground. That's to say the chain hits the ground and makes the noise. And I think, okay, Hama's gonna do something with this chain. Is the chain in the original after this, or is he gonna like do a little retcon where the chain is a little bit more important in the next few pages in the new story?
Yeah, the chain does appear in the original. Scarlet uses it to take down the two troopers that are using the claw. So she does. I think the implication is that she does somehow get back hold of that chain, because she doesn't
after this
point, because she, in the original book,
yeah,
she has the chain, it's around Storm Shadow's neck, he falls down into the dungeon, and then as she pulls herself out of the dungeon, there's no chain. So the story of the chain, fill in the gap.
So Larry Hama, everyone, is retconning Silent Interlude and fixing a story error in the original, because in the original, Scarlet has the chain and then doesn't have the chain and then has the chain. So I don't think Hama is thinking like, man, this is dumb, no one cares. I think Hama's thinking, I have to explain that. Otherwise it doesn't make sense. Well, she has to go back for it. Someone has to bring it to her. She has to get a different chain, or somehow the chain has to sort of present itself to her. Oh, well, Storm Shadow's got it, and he runs past her and drops it because he doesn't need it anymore. And this is the very definition of sort of the unnecessary connective tissue that certainly me and perhaps some other Star Wars fans that spend a lot of oxygen on. It's like, oh, this chapter of this story or this miniseries or like this scene in this one episode in Disney Plus, it's like, did we need to know that like this is how so-and-so like got their lightsaber back after they dropped it? It's like, oh, it had its whole adventure. But interesting that Hama uses this opportunity to fix a mistake that I don't think I ever noticed. I'm going to go a little further. I don't think we or lots of people ever noticed. And we've spent a lot of time inspecting the original Silent Interlude.
Yeah. And then we get to this page, which I think is quite confusing.
We're on page 12, folks.
And yeah, I would go so far as to say quite a low point in the story.
Scarlet picks up the chain. She sees a ladder that I guess goes from level 3 up to level 4, because there's a 3 on the wall. There's a close-up of that hatch, which I think implies that now she's really going to go there. And then she goes there. She runs there. And then, I think this final panel is before she gets to the ladder, she stops and looks to her right and sees that garage door. And this is where the claw comes from a page or two later. I think she is... When I read this the first time, I thought, oh, she climbs up the ladder, and now on the next level up, there's that sort of hexagonal garage door. And I think what's happening here is before she goes up the door,
she notices the door, maybe hears a sound, and ducks out of the way. And then the Cobra Troopers are coming through with that garage door with the Cobra Claw. I think
this page you have on right now, I think this would be proof that these are not Larry Hama's layouts, because the poses on the ninjas and sort of how Destro is overlapping 3 panels, but I think he only actually belongs to the physical space of the first panel. This is not how Larry Hama draws or lays out. And that final panel, is that one of the like 1 or 2 recreations of kind of an actual panel from the original?
Yeah, it's a very similar panel to one of the originals.
Scarlet is on the left, hiding behind a bit of wall, and the rest of the panel is these 2 Cobra soldiers holding the Cobra Claw. Yes, this is a recreation of a panel from the original. In this new one, it's on the bottom of the page, and in the original, it's on the top of the page.
Yep.
And the comparison is unflattering to the newer work. There's all this headroom on the new panel. There's all this space on the top half of the panel where you could have word balloons without covering up anything important. And it's not a badly composed panel at all. But in Hama's original, it is a extremely well composed panel. In that original, where Hama's cropping Scarlet so you don't see her shoulders, her head, right? Based on, the camera's low to the ground. We're looking up so we can see the ceiling. There's some tech on the right side. You get a sense of depth. And because the coloring is done so lightly, nothing sort of feels too heavy. Nothing's like murky. Even if the color and the lighting are sort of not realistic, it's sort of emotionally accurate. And in this new one, it's like, dark castle, tech, gradients, too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was gonna say as well that sort of that comparison of that this page in particular, the way that it looked, the one where she's looking up at this sort of gap in the ceiling. In the original story, Hama was very careful to make sure that each scene, each location was very distinctive, that it was its own shape. As we were transitioning from one to another, it was very clear this is the same place as this one. And what we've got here is metallic rungs of a ladder leading up to a circular opening with a hatch, partially opened hatch above it. And so my thought looking at this page was, why is she back down in the dungeon? Why has she gone back down in there? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And I don't think she is back down in the dungeon. She's just on a different level. And the way that you move between levels is via a ladder that goes up through a circular entrance with a circular covering left ajar on that entrance. So I think this is just an unhelpful repetition of a very, very similar location and setting.
I thought the same thing. And this is a place where you can have color do some of your storytelling for you, not just lighting, but color, right? And it can be literal, like the color of lights in the ceiling or from monitors, but it can also just be, well, the stone, the metal walls on one floor are a little green or a lot green. And, I'm talking about like a murky gray. I don't mean like Forest Kelly green. And the metal walls or the stone floors in another floor could have some red in them or some blue in them. This is a case where not just this recurrence of shape, but similar colors that we've seen all throughout the castle aren't really helping. And that's not to say that in the original silent interlude, color is doing a lot of storytelling or scripting, but you don't need it to there because the art and the layouts are so clear. So then there's some fighting on the next 2 pages.
Yeah, so Snake Eyes is making his way down to find Scarlet at the sort of, and he's going through a duct or disappearing into a duct. And then there's a sort of quite a humorous sort of moment here where, as we know, Scarlet takes the Cobra claw and sort of makes her way off with it after beating up these 2 troopers. And then in this new story, just as the troopers are sort of gathering themselves, composing themselves after having been beaten up, Snake Eyes now comes through a grate out of the ventilation, duct or whatever, jumps out and beats them up for a second time. So somewhat unfortunate for these guys.
Hama's adding a joke here, which is fun.
But we also introduced to the Red Ninjas as well. Again, very confusingly, they're sort of looks like they are jumping. They have been in the oubliette dungeon and jump out from there, from where they're staying, which just seems like quite a confusing introductory beat for these characters.
Yeah, is the idea here that they went down to inspect the dungeon cell and found it was empty, and now they're springing out from it? This is one of those cases where I think I've already said this 3 different ways in this episode, but things were left unexplained and mysterious in the original story, and it was fine and fun. Like in the original story, Storm Shadow, who we've never seen before this issue, although he's in some cartoon episodes, but he's not in the comic. He walks through this doorway, and then all of a sudden there are these 3 ninjas hanging from the ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
and they like land in front of him, and you think that they're all going to fight. And then you turn the page and they present themselves to him, and you think, oh, they're all on the same side. And it never occurred to me to wonder where they came from or why they were there, or very specifically why they're hanging upside down in the ceiling. It's just cool. And if you start to add some story, it's like, well, they came in on a different plane, or they came on a boat, they were having dinner, and then they put on their costumes when they saw the red alert light. Or it's like, oh, well, they were also investigating. It's like, where did Scarlet go? Let's go down. Oh, I think she went up. Like, oh, there are these 2 guys that are knocked out. It's just not necessary.
Yep.
Something is happening on these pages here where, do you see these 2 pages when Snake Eyes is kicking he's jumping in the air and kicking both of these Cobra soldiers at the same time? There's a 5 on the left side of that panel. And then the following page, as Scarlet whooshes in on the claw in this kind of small hallway, surprising Cobra soldiers and Destro, there is a 5 in a similar place. And I think the idea is that, well, I don't know if this is the same hallway, and Scarlet and Snake Eyes sort of missed each other by like 10 feet and like 20 seconds, or if, you know, castle's pretty big, maybe several parts of this 5th floor all have 5s on them. But that's a conspicuous lettering addition that may not be in the original art.
I think the 5 was on that pillar, but yeah, it's, as you say, I think trying to imply that they've just narrowly missed each other, that Snake Eyes was there. He's gone down a level to inspect the oubliette dungeon, that you can see that he's got to that hole in the floor, the original hole in the floor, not the new one, and is standing over it and inspecting it, you know, leading back to him looking over it and getting ambushed by the first of the red ninjas in that original story. Although that beat is largely then kind of missed in the new one. We're kind of a bit more dropped in the action where Destro is, I guess, firing at Scarlet, and Snake Eyes is now sort of in the middle of that fight with the other 2 remaining red ninjas. And there's the original had that iconic aspect of the guy at the top of the stairs, sort of framed in silhouette, almost twirling his size, and then Snake Eyes throwing the grenade, and you seeing that close up, and the realization moment of terror as he, as it dawns on him what is about to happen. Whereas here it's literally a lot more throwaway. Snake Eyes is just sort of jumping away and lobbing a grenade at this guy who is coming up the stairs or going down the stairs, not entirely sure from this, while Storm Shadow and the other guy are kind of hidden behind it, although not completely hidden. So it's like tipping the hand a little bit earlier. The page reveal that we get in the original, they're there laying in wait in ambush. We kind of know that already.
Yeah, to slightly rephrase what you just said, in the original, Snake Eyes taking out this ninja has a page to breathe and is played like a joke with a punchline. And in this new version, it has less than a page, and it's played like part of an action scene, which is fine. It is sort of less satisfying than the original. There's also something interesting going on here where the Televipers, the original Televiper action figure is holding a sort of 2-way video camera where its front, like the lens, is also like a little TV screen. So a Televiper can both record what they're seeing or broadcast, and also show you footage or sort of you can video chat with someone on the front of it, even though as a kid I thought it was a giant laser gun. And here, Jeremy Dale keeps cropping the Televiper's weapon so that it just sort of looks like the Televipers are holding a TV.
Yeah, it looks like he's holding up a massive CRT TV.
A 16-inch cathode ray tube television as opposed to a, I don't know, 8-inch diameter sort of video camera gun TV. And I appreciate that it looks like older tech, looks like something that would exist in 84, not in 2008, but it doesn't match the continuity of the, the toy.
Mm. And also, I guess in the, this isn't necessarily a problem, but in the original comic, the Televiper wouldn't have been introduced until a little while later.
Larry Hama messing up his continuity. When I read issue 144, and it's a flashback to the earliest days of Cobra, and there's an alley viper, right?
It's a viper, isn't it, that they've got in that
and
story?
It's like, no, that shouldn't be a post 86 character. That should be an 82, 83 Cobra soldier. Mm-hmm. But Hama either forgot and it didn't matter, or suggested and someone said, no, have a more modern character because we're selling the newer toys. Or Hama thought, well, this technically takes place, around 82 or 80 when there are only Cobra soldiers, but it's this sliding scale where, I've been writing this story now for 6 years, for 8 years, but, they're all still the same age. Mm. So, Bart Simpson's still in 5th grade, even though the show's been on for 36 years. So now Bart Simpson's got like a smartphone. Are you writing it forwards or backwards? Folks, if you're listening, Mark is using a tool to write the word help in red letters on the goggles of the Televiper, which is a reference back to the show. All right, so just 3 or 4 more pages left, right?
Yep. So what is up next? We've got in the final furlong. So we've got the ninja fight sequence. So we sort of jump forward in time a little bit in this new story where they sort of skip the beat of Snake Eyes going up the stairs and initially being confronted by the ninjas, and suddenly we're just in the middle of the fight between Storm Shadow and the Red Ninja. I guess you've got a hint that is to come because we do see them behind the doorway bit. Again, does feel a little bit like we're missing a beat in the telling of this story, and then there's this kind of new moment of Storm Shadow throwing a throwing star, and Snake Eyes does a lean back Matrix style, and it kind of rips off the front of his uniform, which I guess gives him one of his sort of injuries to tie to the toy. And then behind him is another Snake Eyes, also sort of running towards him. So what even is this, Tim? Is this just a mistake? Is it a coloring error? Is it bad storytelling?
Okay, this is the bottom panel of page 19, if you're reading along, folks. And A, I don't know. B, I thought maybe what's actually happening here is Dale wants this final panel to not read left to right, but right to left. I thought, is the Snake Eyes on the right side running to the left? And after he gets to the left, the throwing star comes at him and he has to, bend down. When Batman or Spider-Man is like swinging through the air and the artist draws them 3 times and you can see sort of iterations of their pose. And maybe the first 2 or 3 are colored a little like lighter or transparent. I thought, is that what this is? But I don't know if the choreography makes sense, that the timing, because in the previous panel, the throwing star has been thrown and is like, 5 feet from Snake Eyes. So there isn't time for him to sort of backtrack 6 steps and then run back here and then sort of limbo backwards so that he doesn't get hit by the throwing star. I cannot figure out what this panel is, Mark.
Okay.
And folks, if you're listening, not watching, where Mark has put these pages up on screen, that second Snake Eyes he drew a circle around and then put a giant question mark next to it. Just one more thing, folks, if you're watching this, not listening, and you're seeing these comparisons, you're seeing the original artwork from the original 21 on the left side of this particular page. And there's that panel where Snake Eyes is running out of the castle and Scarlet has started to swoop down. If you're thinking, man, old comics are so weird looking because that magenta on the castle is like so weird, but the castle's not magenta. Why is it like glowing magenta? This is just where I remind you that the saturation of that ink on newsprint in 1984 felt completely different than the 100% fully saturated M magenta ink that the remastering of this comic has then printed on blinding white glossy paper. The relative brightness of one thing to another is all out of whack when comics are not remastered with their original intent. So please be kind. I assure you the original coloring in 21 is awesome. Okay, and so whatever happens, Snake Eyes has started to take some costume damage, some battle damage, and now Destro's leading the troops out, and we get a little bit more on this sort of final scene where not more story beats, but just slowing it down by dividing it into more panels where Snake Eyes is trapped. He can't go anywhere unless Scarlet rescues him in this flying thing. Storm Shadow has a sword. He's getting ready to throw it. I call it a flying thing. Larry Hama calls it a flying wing. He does throw the sword. Actually, in this new comic, we don't see the actual panel where he throws the sword because that's in the original. And once again, Hama is trying not to retell beats. He's trying to add beats before and after.
And it's worth pointing out that we see a lot more of Destro in this comic than we saw in the original. You know, with him viewing stuff on the security cam feeds earlier on, and we sort of there was that kind of mystery of the original issue that he's leading his troops to chase after Snake Eyes and they're going up and they can't find them, and then that's kind of pretty much the last that we see of Destro. So we're sort of seeing Destro figuring out that he's not up the top of the building. He's leading all of his horses and men down the hill to down the stairs back to get them, and he sort of arrives too late, essentially, as you know, just in time for Snake Eyes and Scarlet to kind of get away. So there's the bit, of throwing the sword, catching it, chucking it over his shoulder. We don't see that beat at all in this new story, but what instead we see is the sword kind of embedded in a rock behind where Snake Eyes would have thrown it.
So here's another very small, kind of fun and unnecessary Larry Hama retcon, where in the original, if you read it and think about it, Storm Shadow has lost his sword because he threw it and Snake Eyes tosses it. And what's happened here is Snake Eyes tosses it and it lodges itself in a rock. Although, based on the angle of throwing the sword up and over his shoulder, I feel like it would be sticking out of that rock, not parallel to the ground, but sort of aiming more up at the sky and sort of sticking out higher. And also, I don't think it has the momentum anymore, having been half stopped and diverted by Snake Eyes, to lodge itself into any rock, much less that deeply. But this now means that Storm Shadow doesn't have to like climb down the mountain to find his sword, which is an issue I would read. Or I bet he would meet Boba Fett, or to like make a new sword or buy a new sword. And then you had circled the final panel. Why do you circle the final panel of 21B, Mark?
So I mean the final page here, they sort of it's quite similar in terms of a lot of the beats that Scarlet, Snake Eyes are flying away on the wing. That panel looks a lot less interesting than the original. They had that sort of like interesting blast on the vertical panel and so on. You get the reveal of Snake Eyes' tattoo on his arm as he's sort of flying away in a similar sort of way. and you get the reveal of Storm Shadow's tattoo, not with him kind of looking up in wonderment at Snake Eyes as his bandaging is sort of unravels, showing the tattoo, but instead the sort of the aftermath of that, of him looking down at the sword and pulling it from the rock, but in a similar sort of composition of him looking down and pulling it out. But it is circled because it's just a bit of a moment where this is an important part of the story. It's an important part of the telling, and I feel the fact that the tattoo has been coloured in grey is just quite a significant error on this particular page, this particular panel.
Yeah, it starts to look more like a gauntlet, or some wrist padding, a bracer. Mark, folks, is now using the same little like red pen tool to color in on a close-up of this panel the incorrectly colored tattoo. That I agree. This is it's sort of, I don't want to say it ruins the ending, but it diminishes the ending. And it is interesting how this comic needs to start and end the same way. The first page and the last page need to be about the same in terms of story, not necessarily composition, as the original Silent Interlude. And all the pages between don't have to be 1920, 21, 22. I just want to point out, I've gotten so used to in the last several years, mainstream comics from Marvel, DC, Image, etc. are all 20 pages, and I long for the days of the 80s and 90s and aughts when they were 22. And this comic that was free with 2 new action figures is indeed a full 22 pages. It was already going to be hard for Hama to sort of do something with Silent Interlude. It might be even harder if he only had today's standard of 20 pages. Sort of looking at here are my notes for the issue. And last week's episode, I wrote nothing on the sheet of paper. So if I ever auction all of my Talking Joe notes, that one's no good. But the first half of this is just all that context that we did at the beginning of the episode. So I have a couple questions and comments at the end. How do I feel about the orange and yellow skies? I think they're nice if I'm in a mood where I like modern computer coloring. I don't think they're terribly done, but it's too much. All the rendering in this comic is too much. And there could be, if you're gonna do modern coloring, there could be a more interesting use of color. Everything here is local color. Scarlet is always, her hair is red, and well, I guess if she's in a dull blue hallway, then her hair is, red plus dull blue. But color could be more editorial, it could be more creative, it could be more storytelling.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of very muddy, washed out, sort of grey blue kind of hallway scenes in the middle. It's a lot less. There's a lot less pop to it.
And on this final page, here's sort of a symbol for me that this color artist is not coloring in a style that I appreciate or needs more training. On this final page, the third to last panel, there's this bright white highlight on Scarlet's leg, which describes that fabric as like satin or silk or like PVC or like pantyhose nylon. And that is not what that fabric is. Like, maybe it's leather. I've never thought that her costume is leather. It's like one of the Dreadnoks has like a leather vest, but that is like cotton or polyester cotton blend or something. And A, it would not have that highlight. And B, considering how yellow and orange the sky is, it would not have that highlight. So I think the color artist is making a lot of decisions that are unmotivated, and they can be less fun or distracting. Okay, so just a couple of final points. My favorite 2 pages of this comic are the ad at the end for the 25th anniversary toy line.
Right.
Where on one side we see Snake Eyes, the 1982 figure, really dramatically lit, the original vintage figure, not a recreation. And on the other side, in the same pose but mirrored, is the 25th anniversary. Snake Eyes, and they're each under a spotlight directly above, and there's some sort of dark G.I. Joe imagery behind them, and then some fun copy on the back, including "The Best is Back," which refers back to the original press kit for the 1982 release, "The Best is Back," which itself refers back to G.I. Joe returning in '82 after being off the market for 5 years. So my favorite part of this comic is not in the comic. We should talk about the back cover for a minute, because there has been a little bit of Hasbro and related companies making use of the G.I. Joe TV animated PSA format, where a kid has a problem and a Joe shows up and solves it and educates them. And then the kid says, "Now I know." And the Joe says, "And knowing is half the battle." And everyone who knows the 80s cartoon knows that. And, the internet has certainly responded with funny, and finger quotes, funny remixes of those. The IDW Saturday Morning Adventures miniseries from 2023. Each of those issues had a new PSA as the final page of the comic. When Kid Rhino was releasing G.I. Joe episodes on VHS, I believe there were some PSA sort of style ads, I think, where there was a PSA style ad around this era for a mail away action figure. Hasbro's done this a couple times. And this one is just for the 25th anniversary figures, right? So this kid says, "I'm just riding my bike across the interstate. Who needs a helmet?" Right? As a truck comes barreling down behind him. And then in a flash of white, Gung Ho actually apparates into the scene, which is a takeoff of how weird it is that the Joes would just appear, even though they'd never actually teleported in. They were just already there. Come on, everyone. Alpine just hangs out at the county fair, and happens to find a kid who's lost his parents. I do that all the time. "Listen up, soldier. It's Gung Ho." And then he holds up a figure and says, "You should buy the figures." And then the kid says, "Now I know." And Gung Ho says, "Knowing is half the battle." And the joke is, behind him, the truck has destroyed his bike. And so it's making fun of the PSA format, because the kid's about to do something unsafe and a Joe saves him. But in this case, not by suggesting he look both ways before crossing the street, or wear his helmet, or just not cross the interstate on a bike, but by buying action figures. And this is meta, because this Gung Ho character exists in a world where there are Gung Ho action figures. We don't know who drew this back cover. We don't know who wrote it. I do like the font. It's not a comic book lettering font. Color's good, right? It is drawn in a quote animated style. And it's sort of a fun and funny way to end this comic. This comic that's a very meta comic, that's advertising a very specific toy. But here's this ad for this toy line that refers to the cartoon. And the cartoon's not really a part of this anniversary, except for the fact that the 2 5-packs of toys that kicked off the anniversary came with a little box. And if you push a button, it would play the theme song of the cartoon. But anyway, my last 2 comments on my notes. This comic book. We should also talk about the cover, which we didn't do at the beginning. Yeah, let's talk about the cover. Let's take a look at the covers in the gallery. Oh, there's only one cover, the no variants. This one is drawn by Jeremy Dale. His signature is on it.
Right.
And based on the original pencil art for 1 or 2 of his other covers for this series, I think this may be actually a signature that was actually on this artboard, although it also looks a little bit like it was shrunken down and moved, because the lines are very thin. But anyway, this has Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, 2/3 figures. It's from head to knees, and they're both holding swords and kind of leaning in. They're sideways to us, as if they're about to duel. Snake Eyes has this costume damage. His tattoo has been revealed. Storm Shadow has not. He's not wearing the hood, but he does have the red sort of recolored for his wrist wrappings and waist belt. And then behind them is some of the castle. It's not clear if they're actually standing on a part of the castle or kind of floating, you know, or like maybe they're standing on the ground and this is like a billboard of the castle behind them. The clouds in the background, it's not a photo of real clouds, but it looks a little bit in that direction. Photorealistically computer painted clouds, which is pretty, but I think if you're going to like have an artist draw comic book characters, you should have them draw comic book clouds or have the color artist kind of color comic book clouds. I don't love that the Cobra insignia gets obstructed on the top left by the logo. I do appreciate that the logo isn't as tall as a lot of comic book logos. It doesn't take up like the top third, it's more the top fifth. But, okay, so Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are both sort of drawn handsomely. And this cover is pencils only. You can really tell down on Storm Shadow's thigh, right under his sort of belt wrapping. But this cover has a weakness, which is the coloring and rendering on Snake Eyes. The dark gray and black of his costume is so dark. And then the highlights, the white highlights, are so many that he becomes a jumble of sort of murk. And I sort of lose where his goggles are and the little like slits where his mouth are for breathing and sort of what's a pouch and what's a fold or a wrinkle or a muscle. And he's standing, he's not moving, he's not running, he's not throwing or lunging, but the coloring on him is way too busy. And I sort of can't see him.
Yeah, I think you're right. A contrast is to the original cover where they're not trying to do that local color at all of sort of grasping how to show the detail of a all black costume. That it's being illuminated with the muzzle flash of his Uzi, and most of the coloring is white or yellow or orange, with sort of the details, you know, flashing from that gunfire, and you know, largely the kind of the, I guess, almost backlight, would you call it, or sort of silhouetting achieved by that. So it's a very kind of different way of trying to tackle that same problem of how do you show the detail of Snake Eyes costume when it's, you know, entirely black essentially.
It's worth rephrasing that in a slightly different way. Snake Eyes' costume is all black, and in the story of this original cover on 21, at night he's on a black battlement. So how would you make him clear? Well, night can be, you know, dark blue or kind of dark aqua. You know, Batman the Animated Series, all the skies are red. And sure, the building here can be black, and you have black shadows on Snake Eyes, but the rest of him is all lit up by something. I think of the cartoon where, you know, in season 1, he's dark blue with a little bit of purple and his Caucasian hands. In season 2, he's black. Sorry. In the first miniseries, he's dark blue. In the second miniseries, he's dark blue or black. And then in the regular 1985 episodes, I think that's when they settle on gray. And not even a dark gray, kind of a medium dark gray, right? Because if it's any darker, it's going to photograph too dark and you won't see it on TVs. Like, animators knew what paint colors they could use and what they couldn't, and how they would look when shot on film, when transferred to video, when broadcast over TV, right? This had been figured out. And if you go back to the Jeremy Dale cover for Silence Between Borders, I think, man, if you just had no highlights on Snake Eyes. Also, the highlights don't make sense because the sun is behind them and the sun is yellow. So is there, like, when the photographer set up this photo of these two guys to take the picture, is there like a key light and a rim light to the left behind the photographer, like aiming at Snake Eyes' front? Okay. What a jerk I am. If this cover, same drawing, same background, Storm Shadow can be the same too. If you just colored Snake Eyes like medium dark blue or the medium dark gray of the animated series, even though it's not accurate to the toy or maybe the story inside, it would read.
Hmm.
What's that little thing where the sword becomes the handle? Oh, that's the radar.
That's a little radar dish. Yeah.
Yeah, this still feels a little bit like the characters were drawn on one piece of paper and the background was drawn on another piece of paper, and then they were combined in Photoshop, and they don't overlap and line up in the strongest way. Because I feel like if you were drawing these all together, you wouldn't draw so little of the radar dish to then become this sort of like shape that rhymes with the sword because it's on the same angle and you can barely see any of it. Okay, so wrapping up.
Hey, I didn't talk about my book, by the way, before we wrap up. G.I. Joe 20th anniversary comics.
Oh, wait, go full screen. Folks, Mark doesn't have back issues in bags and boards. Mark has taken all of his comics to a book binder to be bound in hardcover. And so, all the Hasbro pack-in comics are in one hardcover. Wow. Is that and the two that are harder to find, or the two? Nice. Did I help you find that one?
You did, yes.
What a good friend I am. Oh, and the Valor vs. Venom one. Can't wait till we talk about that one on Talking Joe. So, wait. Can you show the spine again? You had 3 names.
I had Hama, Dale, and I think Go. Or
G-O-H.
G-O-H.
Which are some of the other ones?
Yeah.
Okay, so some wrap-up thoughts on G.I. Joe 21B, Silence Between Borders. This comic is a combination of things we've already seen that were done better, things we don't need to see, and things that jump awkwardly or don't make sense without the original issue 21 handy. And I think this is a noble failure. I think this comic is a failure. This isn't a near miss or a disappointment. I think this comic is a failure. It doesn't work. But, if you've got 400 issues of G.I. Joe written by the same guy, 2 or 5 or 10 of them are going to be real duds, right? Some of you think that number is much higher. But I do appreciate the attempt. I think the only way this would work, I think this is my sort of wrap-up thought. I think the only way that this would have worked is if Hama had the original issue and basically like a pair of scissors and some blank paper, or a pencil and some blank paper, and a page count, and the editorial direction was using the original pages and panels, spread this out so that it's now 30 or 48 pages long, and add a bunch of pages or break up the pages and add a bunch of new panels and pages between panels and pages so that it is one seamless reading experience. And then, and this really wouldn't happen, we're going to get, Steve Lealoha to ink it. Hama would not just write, but would provide breakdowns, and whoever colored the new material would reference all the old colors. And then, of course, it'd be printed at full saturation on glossy paper, and I'd be really grumpy about it. And then we could argue sort of the merits of like, oh, well, is Larry Hama in 2008 like the same penciler, layout artist that he was in 84? Or, oh, is Hama using the same skills if this isn't a crazy deadline rush job? If he's not sort of desperately just like telling any story, if he, has like a normal amount of time to do it, then we could sort of argue, is he up to the task? Is it a good idea? But I think as was this comic that was made and released, not a good idea. But I sort of wonder, are there many, many more of these? Because toy production is so high compared to like comic book print runs in 2008, or is the number of these out there quite low because by 2008 G.I. Joe was not on top anymore, and these pack-in comics were already like a subset of G.I. Joe, and they weren't store exclusives, but these were not these aren't Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers and Batman. being released in 2008.
Mm.
So I sort of think about, if this is a bad G.I. Joe comic, and that might sort of harm the brand, right? Or turn someone off if this is the first G.I. Joe story they ever read, which I don't think is really going to happen. But I don't see a lot of these at stores or conventions. So I don't think there are a ton of them compared to how many Devil's Due issues were being published at the time, or at the beginning of the IDW run. So I do think this phrase is a little harsh, but I do think the sort of potential damage done is pretty small here for being a bad G.I. Joe comic, because it's not likely to be snapped up. And actually, now that I think about it, I bet a great percentage of these are still mint sealed with the toys.
Yeah, could be.
And maybe plenty of the people who have them open are toy guys who maybe collect G.I. Joe comics, but don't really read them, but like really focus on the toys. And I've certainly met folks like that at conventions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my long-winded final thoughts.
Yeah, funny.
Mark?
I think I'm in a very similar sort of frame of mind, so I don't need to necessarily repeat what you said. But I think this might have been the first G.I. Joe comic that I gave to my son, because I got this toy, I got this comic, I read the comic, thought to myself, this isn't very good. I don't need to keep it, and gave it to I gave it to James, I think, and so it was in his box of comics and stuff. And then when I came around to the idea that I probably should collect these comics together, I went back and found that comic that I had given him, and compared to most of the others in this bound volume, it's a little bit more creased and worn than some of the others. So for that reason, so it was sort of to some degree almost saved from the bin.
Taking my thought and your thought and splitting the difference, do you think this comic made a positive or a negative impression on your son for being what sounds like an early G.I. Joe comic that he read?
Yeah, I don't know that he necessarily paid a huge amount of time to it, to be honest. I don't think
Right.
it particularly registered. But yeah, as an indoctrination of here's a great comic to read to get you started, it probably wasn't the one.
Right. I do like handing people a reprint of G.I. Joe #1, particularly if it has Hot Potato. And I do like I've handed a few people Special Missions 2, and I've said, do you not care about G.I. Joe specifically? You just want to read a good action comic? Here's a good action comic. But I would not do this with 21B.
Cool. So we are done talking about 21B, I think. Next time on Talking Joe, you can catch us. We will probably be talking about one of the very latest comics from Skybound, either A Real American Hero, coming out monthly still from Hama in present day, or from the Energon universe. We're also sort of sidetracking, like we are here, looking at other comics from back in the day and wrapping up our Devil's Due era coverage, and also talking to interesting people about G.I. Joe. You can find us...
Mark,
Go on.
does this need a jingle? Does this series need a jingle? I'm thinking of the Aerosmith song Toys in the Attic. And could the lyrics be rewritten as Toys with a Comic?
Okay.
You're welcome.
I'll definitely not do that. You can find Talking Joe in the normal places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to those places. We're on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. You might be viewing us on YouTube as we speak, or you might be listening to the audio-only version of the podcast, which is typically the YouTube video, with a little bit of extra TLC to make it optimized for your listening experience.
The colors are all brighter and it's on glossy white paper.
We are also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. A big thanks to Richard, Sam, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, Mike, D, Shane V2. This version of Shane comes with a red sash and a brown hood, plus Infinite Entertainment and Patrick, our latest subscriber. All of those guys would have received early access to this episode as just an example. Tim, where can you be found when you're not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
Look for informative and funny video essays on television and film on YouTube. That's at Atomic Abe. I own a brick and mortar comic book store near Boston, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Say, Tim, do you have any of these toy pack-in comics for sale at your store? That's putting you on the spot.
We're recording this in late spring of 25. Maybe one or two. I think I had a couple more, but a buddy actually is trying to complete a complete run, and so I think I diverted a few from the store as a birthday present. These when I go to conventions, if I'm looking for cheap issues of G.I. Joe to maybe buy to sell at my store, these do come up. Toy vendors do try to sell these at toy conventions.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, I guess, in terms of where you find these things, because they're a comic that come with the toy, not distributed through standard channels, they might potentially appear in collections that would have other things like toys instead of comics. Cool. So I think that we are done, Tim. But before we go, remind us of something very important.
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
With his covered face, say my name, say my name. It's not a valid silence. He's physiologically unable, but it's kind of the same.
And knowing is half the battle, you little twerp.